Gino Kenny.
Minister, my question relates to a decision earlier on this year in relation to the IDA to expand into Israel. Obviously, that's a retrogressive step in our opinion. So I'd like to hear your comment on that decision by the IDA.
Yeah, well, the IDA Ireland is an autonomous statutory agency which operates in accordance with the Industrial Development Acts 1986 to 2019 and is under the aegis of the Minister for Enterprise, Trade and Employment, who's best placed to comment on the agency's activities and decisions and is responsible for trade. The Taoiseach and Minister for Enterprise, Trade and Employment has already answered a number of parliamentary questions on this matter. Ireland distinguishes between the territory of the State of Israel and the territories occupied since 1967 in all of its engagements with Israel, including on trade and economic issues. This position is common across all government departments, and policy coherence is ensured through coordination at official level. Ireland is committed to the implementation of EU law, which makes a meaningful distinction between Israel and settlements in occupied territory. This distinction has important practical effects. Since settlements are not part of Israel, the EU-Israel Association Agreement does not apply to them. This means that different tariffs apply to goods from settlements, and settlements are not eligible for participation in EU-Israel programmes. EU law and guidelines clearly differentiate between settlements on the one hand and Israel on the other. As such, they are an important part of the EU contribution to the implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 2334, which condemns the construction and expansion of settlements and calls on all states to distinguish in their relevant dealings between the territory of the State of Israel and the territories occupied since 1967. The Department of Foreign Affairs ensures that there is information available for the public and companies regarding Ireland's policy on settlements via the Department's website. A whole-of-government approach is applied to the policy of differentiation, and my department also supports other government departments by providing guidance and clarification on the policy of differentiation.
Mr. Over the summer, a well-known ice cream maker called Ben & Jerry, which is an American company, announced that they would no longer be selling ice cream in the occupied Palestinian territories, which is East Jerusalem and Palestinian West Bank. Now, this was greeted with kind of much disdain in certain parts of the world, but huge congratulations that a company that's going to take a stand against apartheid Israel. But yet in Ireland, we, through the vehicle of the IDA, we want to, as the IDA says, to develop the IDA global footprint and to develop more economical links with Israel. Now, that is completely contrary to what you say here every week. On one hand, you condemn Israel, and on the other hand, another vehicle of this state says to congratulate Israel for their crimes. So which is it? Condemn or congratulate?
Sorry, Deputy, we make a distinction between Israel and occupied territory. I don't believe that settlements are legal. I've said many times on the record that I believe that settlements and their expansion in occupied territory is illegal under international law. I raise that issue probably more than any other EU minister does on an international stage, whether it's in Foreign Affairs Council meetings, whether it's at the UN or on other international fora, and here. And I raise it bilaterally, directly also, with the Israeli government, including the new Israeli Foreign Minister and Deputy Prime Minister, who I've spoken to about this issue. So, Deputy, my position on this is really clear. That does not mean that Ireland shouldn't have a relationship with Israel. I believe we should. And if Irish state agencies have a relationship with the State of Israel, that is normal in terms of bilateral relations between two states.
Thank you, Minister.
That is a different issue to the issue of us raising bluntly and directly with the Israeli government and with others the illegality of settlements and the responsibility that Israel has in the context of occupied territory.
Sorry,
Minister, I don't think you do get it. I just don't think you get it. I think you come in here on a weekly basis and say you're, against the annexation of Palestinian lands, but at the same time treat Israel as a normal state. Now, would you do that, to say the same thing about apartheid to South Africa, say in the 1980s? No, you wouldn't. You wouldn't. So that's the contradiction that we, as TDs in the opposition, constantly say to you. You cannot treat Israel as a normal state. It's not a normal state. It's an apartheid state. That's inherited in its kind of brutality against the Palestinian people. So my question, Minister, is, have the IDA, first of all, created an office in Israel? Where is that office? Which economical links have they connected with Israeli companies? So hopefully you can answer that, because that's very, very, if the IDA have created economic links that kind of go beyond the margins of what you say here every week, then it's a complete contradiction from not only you, but your government.
Deputy, it's not a contradiction at all. My position on Israel, our relationship with Israel, which I believe is important, and I think it's also an important agent to deliver change in terms of Israel's policy towards Palestinians, which I have been very critical of, and I continue to be. I'm not responsible for the IDA, and the line minister who has answered questions on this and will continue to answer questions if they're raised. But my position is clear. Ireland should have a bilateral relationship with Israel, but Ireland should also be consistent with international law, with UN Security Council resolutions, in terms of calling out illegality when it happens. And that's what we do. That's what mature states do. They talk to each other. When there are differences, they discuss them. And I would say that Ireland continues to be one of the most outspoken countries in the world in the context of the relationship between Israel and Palestine, and the need to move towards a negotiated peaceful solution. And that's what we'll continue to do.